It's the Innovation Stream, and I'm here with James Harmer. So we're talking about futuring. I'll confess I don't know what that means, so please fill me in from the start.
Well, I mean, futuring is a term for how do we think about the future? How do we put ourselves in a position to be able to kind of unpick the future? And I mean, futuring is one phrase. There's lots of different ways of talking about this kind of practice, I suppose. Something that people often use is the term strategic foresight. For me, futuring is about having a boldness, really, the ability to put yourself into a situation where you've got the space and the time to really think about what are the implications of the future.
And this is a thing you do?
This is a thing that I love to do. And I think this is a practice that as innovators, we must do, we should be doing, and we should be doing much, much more of.
How far into the future are you talking about here?
I think, at the moment it feels very much more realistic to maybe have a kind of 2050 vision. So anything that's kind of, 20, 30 years out, I think is still perfectly feasible to be looking at, partly because as much as, this isn't Jetsons fiction, and we don't want to get into a Jetsons fiction scenario, what we do have are some established technologies, and we have some established kind of things that are already kind of documented. We know about the change in computing power. We know about how connectivity is going to allow new things to happen in future. And although we don't have all of those technologies mapped, we know what the fundamental building blocks of the future are going to look like. We also know about existential threats, major crises that have occurred and potentially will occur in future as well. So because of those things, we've got the kind of Lego bricks that we would need to start a construction of the future to help our partners and our clients in thinking about that.
So I love the idea of building blocks. Let's get as many of them as we can on the table. What are the building blocks to draw a picture of the future?
So I think the first major building block is, as a company, what is it that you're doing, that you're making at the moment? Where are you now? So that will be one of the pivotal building blocks we'll put in the middle. And all of the different businesses that we're seeing that come through our doors obviously have a different take on what it is they're making, what it is they're thinking about, whether it's a service or a product. And those sorts of things in terms of those contexts, political, social, environmental, those building blocks will all have a fundamental impact on what their futures look like. So there's some really important building blocks around the edge of your business that you can't necessarily control, but they need to be taken into consideration. And then I guess there's the technologies, there's the things that open up huge possibilities for companies, many of which they're already totally tapped into. So we're not professing to be the new experts in a technology if your company is all about that technology. But what we are able to do is to help you, if you're very entrenched in a certain way of doing business or a certain technology, to think about what else that might look like, what else that could be, taking a much broader view and looking at what the competition are doing, looking at what new startups are doing or how new things have emerged to kind of do things differently and maybe change the angle and the trajectory that you might have as a business. So the other thing that I think is really exciting is this new space that we're going to be inhabiting. So we're here physically talking to each other, but many of the times we're talking over Teams or we're talking over Zoom or we're talking over, and that's started to become a major part of our experience working together. The prediction is that that will just continue to accelerate in terms of inhabiting a digital space as well as a physical space in a very natural way. And so this idea that the physical world and the digital world come together has been coined phygital, that our lives will become phygital in future as we start to make sure that this hybrid way of working is embedded into everything that we do.
The only reservation I have when I see Zuckerberg talking about things like the metaverse is the why? Why would I want to spend more of my time in an environment like that? I can't see an inherent appeal. Is there something I'm missing?
Yes.
Okay, what?
What you're missing is the fact that you and I are both mid-40s? Is that fair to say?
Annoyingly, you're right. 45, yeah.
So my kids already spend most of their time in this phygital world. In fact, I would argue that they probably spend more time in the digital world than the physical. Now, you could say, I'm a bad parent, and maybe I am. But the fact of the matter is, that's where all their friends are. That's what socializing looks like. That's what COVID has accelerated hugely. And The big deal about it is the fact that so much more of their time is taken up in a place where there are no physical constraints in this new world. If they want to hop with their friends to a beach party in Malibu, which just happens to be an environment that's created in the digital world, they can't get there physically, but they can have an environment that feels just like that via devices, wearables. But actually in future, we can imagine the whole environment that we're living in having the ability for projections, for new ways, for the digital experiences, imagery, etc., to take up much more of our environment. And some people are hedging their bets and saying it's going to be about wearables, glasses, VR goggles. They're going to be long gone. We'll have, very agile, sensible things that we can actually just put on our faces that allow us to have that augmented reality. I think that's going to be accelerating. In fact, it's been tipped to say that the kind of increase in that technology is going to happen faster than mobile phone technology, moving from a phone with a cord in a car back in the late 70s, early 80s to where we are now. That kind of technological increase is going to be seen again in wearable technology, but it's going to happen so much faster.
I think you just said, get with it, Grandad. I think that's more or less what you just said.
Pretty much, and I'm saying it
Okay.
to myself as well, Richard.
Okay,
Don't
great.
take offence.
Great, I'll live with that. CDP is an end-to-end innovation partner. It's product and service and technology development. I picture within that clients come with an idea of a thing they want to build, but is it easy to convince that client that what they should do is step back and consider the world of 10, 20, and 30 years from now?
Look, I'm really lucky. We've had a couple of clients recently that have come to us as experts in the field of innovation and have said, we want you to help us build a 20-year roadmap. Looking out to 2040, how is our product and our service going to look when we start to think about all of these technological enablers and cultural change? But for many of our clients, they are invested and embedded in the world of making something and delivering that thing. It's a product that needs to be built. That's why you need engineering and innovation expertise to really think about how do you bring it to life. But I think tagged into or as part of those early conversations around what is it we're making, what's the brief, why are we doing it? The why are we doing it is such an important part of our role as consultants, because we wouldn't refuse or we wouldn't want to refuse the opportunity to work with some of these incredible companies. But what we would want to be able to do, I'm sure, is to have those conversations around what else could this be? If it's not something that fundamentally has to function in the way that it does now, because of the way that the future is changing, have we planned for the longevity of this product or service? Have we really thought about what's going to be influencing its success in the marketplace? Not in the next 2 years, in the next 10 years. And I think that conversation about the next 10 years versus the next 2 is one that as consultants we should all be having with our client partners.
So I love a model. I love some detail, some rigor to bring some understanding to these things. I think you got one. What were you going to describe?
Yeah, well, one of the models that I think is really helpful for futuring is a very simple 4 Futures framework created by Professor James Datar. He said that in most contexts, and pretty much in every context we find ourselves in, there are 4 different archetypal scenarios. And you can apply those to whatever business context you find yourself in as well. The classic model is growth. That's how so many companies have fundamentally kind of managed and sought after, growth for their business. And growth is something that's becoming more challenging these days. We know that companies are having to think about their growth models differently. You mentioned before about sustainability, and that's a big part of how we're thinking that we need to do things differently. And companies that are maybe adverse to doing things too differently are looking at defense. So, how can we make sure that we are able to defend our current position, that we avoid getting into a situation where we're not growing? The worrying thing about the 4 Futures framework is that one of the potentially negative outcomes, if change isn't taken and if course correction doesn't happen, is catastrophe. What happens if you continue to do what you've always been doing, change doesn't happen, and ultimately it has a catastrophic impact on society or on your business? What does that look like? What's that scenario? And then the last one is about transformation. So taking into consideration what we've just talked about in terms of growth, catastrophe, defense, actually, is there a way to do something radically different that transforms your current business model and opens you up to a new world of possibilities outside of your existing business structure?
So thinking about the future is in no way new, of course. What are you describing that's different to just the way any company would have thought about the future regularly?
So I think part of where we've netted out as global society at the moment is we can't carry on doing what we have been doing. And that's obvious. When you look at the implications of COVID and all of the sustainability issues that we've got, there's an absolute recognition now across the board that business as usual is not something that we can carry on with. So the difference really in terms of futuring now is that we are, I think, open to those really honest conversations in the boardroom about what we have been doing and where we actually might need to go in future, to maintain our business or to transform our business, but also for the greater good of everything else, for the survival of humankind. So these are huge questions for businesses to be asking, but they're the questions that we have to ask at the moment.
And CDP, much of CDP's work is product development, perhaps consumer products, healthcare products. What's relevant there is often things like right to repair and circular economy, reusing the materials and so on. Is the battle there won in terms of the idea? Is it accepted that must happen and now it's just delivery? Or is there still a hearts and minds thing going on there?
Oh, I think the battle is still raging. There's been some positive reports recently of companies opening things up a little more to be able to make sure that the right to repair is still there. And of course, it would be really fantastic if that was happening across all products, that they could easily be repaired and reused and have a second life. But again, I think there are still so many companies that are fundamentally wedded to the way that we make money is by once this thing's been broken or depleted, another one is rolled out. And we certainly haven't got to the new business models yet that allow for things like right to repair to really work.
James, it's been great to hear the passion you've got for futuring. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me on your big green sofa, Richard.
Pleasure, it's great, isn't it?
I love it.